A reading from the book of Job. Job spoke, saying, "Is not man's life on earth a drudgery? Are not his days those of hirelings? He is a slave who longs for the shade, a hireling who waits for his wages. So I have been assigned months of misery, and troubled nights have been allotted to me. If in bed I say, 'When shall I arise?' then the night drags on. I am filled with restlessness until the dawn. My days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle. They come to an end without hope. Remember that my life is like the wind. I shall not see happiness again." The word of the Lord. Is this a prayer that you would make? It seems kind of perhaps negative and maybe even untrusting. So maybe a better question is this the kind of prayer that one should make? Well, first of all, it is most certainly a prayer. The context of where this appears in Job, where this passage appears, is Job is debating with his friends why he is suffering. And we know that this is a prayer because Job switches his language. He says, "Zachor, you, the one God, remember the shortness of my life." Not Zichru, you, all my friends that I was talking with a minute ago, remember. He's talking to the one God. It's a prayer. So, being a prayer, what kind of prayer is this? Well, first of all, it's a prayer that has some implicit trust to it. There's really no point at all of saying, "God, remember me, remember the shortness of my life, remember my suffering," if in the end that's something that's totally meaningless. So there's an implicit trust to it. But at the same time, there is also resignation. Notice that Job says that he is without hope. He doesn't think that he'll ever see happiness again. He's not asking God to change his conditions. Instead, he's crying out, he's pouring out his agony, he's pouring out his emotions, his suffering, he's pouring out all of this to God. He's not asking for God to change what is going on in his life. And we know that this is a valid prayer because at the end of the book of Job, God vindicates Job, saying that Job spoke well of him. And we can also compare this to the prayer of Jesus on the cross. "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani," my God, why have you forsaken me?" In that prayer, Jesus was not asking his Father to come down and wrench him off of the cross. No, he's calling out to God in a prayer of relationship. And that's key. This is a prayer of relationship. Now, relationship, encountering God, seeing God in a new and personal way, this is the language of the new evangelization that we so often use. And for good reason. This is a lament. And this is a lament that is fostering encounter, a new encounter with God. Job did not get the answer to the questions that he was asking. Why am I suffering? Instead, what he got was an encounter with God to know him in a new and personal way. And lament fosters this kind of encounter because not only does it require some trust and relationship to start with, but it then builds new relationship and new trust. It does this through fostering the kind of openness that one sees between close friends, the kind of openness that's required to build trust. And it also fosters the ability to see what in our lives God is asking us to surrender. In my life, when I first became convinced that God was calling me to be a religious, I lamented that I would never marry, that I would never have children. And I was basically left with two options. The first is leaving God on this purely intellectual level. God remains an abstraction. I never have to deal with these difficult feelings. They're all over there. And I never have to be the bad guy who questions God. The downside, of course, is that God remains distant from me, that these emotions are still present, and they're able to then boil up later and make ministry much more difficult. The other option is lament, is crying out to God, is being open and honest with all of myself, with my emotions and everything of me, being open with God. The risk to this is, of course, having to deal with those emotions. But the reward is getting to know God in a new and more profound way. And that is exactly what I experienced. Through this lament, through this being open to God, I was able to more easily see, more clearly see what He was asking me to do, the decisions He was asking me to make. And I was able to mourn what I was leaving behind. At the same time, I was able to then move forward where I thought God was calling me, and follow Him. Now, don't get me wrong, I love being a friar. I think it was a good decision. I think it was something that I would do again, over and over again. But that doesn't mean that this was something that was painless. And I think that we all have these painful things in our lives. It might be something as simple as going through studies. It might be a medical diagnosis of ourselves or somebody that we love. It might be that we have to make a decision that we know is going to get a lot of backlash. For all of these things, the lesson that Job offers us is that through lament, through being open to God, we are able to receive a closer relationship with God. He can handle our lament. The question is, will we take advantage of this?